The probate office squatted like a sun-bleached toad at the edge of the Nevada desert, its windows filmed with decades of dust and bureaucratic indifference. Ethan Cole shifted in the cracked vinyl chair, studying the tarnished keyring that had just changed hands, along with a manila envelope bearing his name in his uncle's careful script. Harold was particular about his affairs, the clerk said, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses that had seen better decades. Left specific instructions. Said you'd understand what to do with these. Ethan turned the keys over in his palm. 3 different metals, 3 different cuts, none of them house keys. The heaviest bore the logo of a storage facility he'd never heard of. Tucked beneath the keys was a folded slip of paper, yellowed at the edges. What they buried isn't gone. Start where we kept the overflow. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Uncle Harold had been the kind of man who swept floors and emptied wastebaskets for 30 years without anyone noticing him. A custodian at Nellis Air Force Base, then later at the classified installations that didn't officially exist. Ethan hadn't seen him in a decade, not since the funeral that had driven him out of the Air Force and into civilian life. He mentioned anything else? Ethan asked. The clerk shook his head. Just said his nephew would know what to do. Said you worked at the base once. Worked. Such a gentle word for what had happened out there. Ethan pocketed the keys and headed for his truck, the desert heat hitting him like a physical blow the moment he stepped outside. The storage facility sat 20 miles out of town, a collection of beige metal boxes surrounded by chain link and good intentions. The manager, a nervous man with tobacco-stained fingers, barely looked up from his crossword when Ethan presented the paperwork. Unit 47B, been paid up for 2 years in advance. Your uncle was real specific about the arrangements. The lock turned easily, too easily for something that had supposedly sat untouched. Inside, cardboard boxes were stacked with military precision, each labeled in Harold's neat handwriting. Not standard military serial numbers, but janitorial codes, wet lab surplus, observation MISC, containment equip. Ethan opened the first box and found obsolete respirators, their filters still sealed in plastic. The second contained gloves stained with something that had turned the latex a sickly yellow-green. Iodine, maybe. Or something worse. The third box made his hands shake. Sample vials, empty but labeled with faded alphanumeric codes. He recognized the format from his Air Force days. The kind of classification system used for materials too sensitive for standard documentation. One label caught his eye, a 51 Echo 07 Echo. He'd heard that designation whispered in secure corridors, always followed by silence and changed subjects. At the bottom of the stack, wrapped in oilcloth, was a maintenance map of the base perimeter. Most of it showed familiar territory, but a section near the eastern fence line was marked with a red X and a notation in Harold's handwriting. DCOM 1987. Still hot. Decommissioned areas didn't stay hot for 30 years, not unless something was still running. The last box contained a cassette recorder, the kind Harold used to use for his maintenance logs. Ethan found a fresh battery in his truck and pressed play. His uncle's voice emerged from the tiny speaker, tired and careful. If you're hearing this, boy, then I'm gone, and you're the only one left who might understand. 47 years I cleaned up after them. 47 years of seeing things that shouldn't exist, hearing things that shouldn't be possible. They told us the Echo project was terminated in '87, told us everything was destroyed or relocated. But power doesn't lie, Ethan, and there's still power bleeding into that wing. If there's power, something's still alive. The tape clicked off, leaving only the desert wind and the distant sound of jets from the active test ranges. Ethan sat in his truck until the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, turning the sky the color of old blood. He could drive back to Vegas, file the storage unit transfer, and pretend Uncle Harold had left him nothing but old junk and paranoid rambling. But the power didn't lie, and Harold Cole had never been a man to imagine things. As twilight settled over the desert, Ethan started the engine and turned toward the old base road. The perimeter fence materialized out of the dusk like a metal skeleton, chain link and razor wire stretching into darkness on either side of the access road. Official signs warned of restricted airspace, authorized personnel only, lethal force authorized. But underneath the government warnings, someone had spray-painted newer graffiti. They're still watching, and the truth is buried here. Ethan parked a quarter-mile from the fence and walked the rest of the way, using the maintenance map to navigate by starlight. The section marked on Harold's map should have been dead, decommissioned since the Reagan administration. But as he approached the eastern perimeter, he heard it, a low electrical hum that made his teeth ache. The fence here looked different from the newer sections. Older posts, different wire gauge, but the current running through it was definitely live. Warning placards hung at regular intervals, their reflective letters catching his flashlight. Danger, high voltage, and below that, in smaller text, Section 7, authorized personnel only. Following the fence line south, Ethan found what Harold's map had marked as a maintenance access point. The culvert was barely visible, disguised as a natural wash that ran beneath the fence. But the entrance was sealed with a makeshift barrier, mop handles cut and lashed together with zip ties. Harold's work, using his custodial supplies to mark safe passage, Ethan cut the ties and crawled into the tunnel. The concrete walls were smooth, clearly military construction, but old enough that decades of flash floods had carved patterns in the surface. 20 feet in, the tunnel branched upward. Fresh boot scuffs marked the concrete, and the air carried a sharp ozone scent that made his nose burn. He emerged in what had once been a logistics yard. Concrete pads were cracked and sun-bleached, weeds growing through expansion joints. Most of the structures were gone, reduced to foundations and broken conduit. But in the center of the yard, a single electrical box ticked with low-voltage current. Its access panel secured with a padlock that looked far too new for a facility abandoned in 1987. Ethan had been an aircraft systems technician before the accident that ended his career. Some skills never left you. The padlock yielded to his multi-tool, and the control panel inside showed active circuits. Not much power, but enough to keep something running. Emergency lighting, maybe, or life support. A service door, set into what remained of a concrete wall, stood slightly ajar. Cold air whispered from the gap, carrying that same metallic scent he'd noticed in the storage unit samples. The door wasn't locked. It should have been, after 30 years of abandonment, but someone had been maintaining access. Someone who wanted the way in to stay open, at least for those who knew where to look. Ethan pulled the door wider and stepped into the darkness beyond. The corridor stretched into blackness, longer than his flashlight could penetrate. Emergency lighting strips along the ceiling flickered to life as he moved, triggered by ancient motion sensors, still somehow functional. The floor was institutional linoleum over concrete, cracked and peeling but clean. Too clean for a facility abandoned for decades. Directory signs on the walls pointed toward different sections. Wet lab, cryogenics, observation. The lettering was stenciled in the precise military fashion Ethan remembered, but the paint was fresh enough to suggest recent maintenance. Someone had been keeping this place functional. His footsteps echoed as he moved deeper into the complex. Offices lined the main corridor, their doors standing open to reveal empty desks and disconnected computer terminals. But it was what he found in the fourth office that made him stop cold. A calendar on the wall showed July 1987, the last month circled in red ink. But beneath it, scattered across the desk, were maintenance logs dated just 3 months ago. Harold's handwriting, documenting power consumption, temperature readings, and something called containment integrity checks. The hallway ended at a heavy security door marked Authorized Personnel Only, Project Echo. The lock was electronic, but decades-old electronics. Ethan's multi-tool made short work of the access panel, and the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Beyond was something that shouldn't have existed in an abandoned facility. A laboratory, or what was left of one. Containment chambers lined the walls, their thick glass viewports cracked but intact. Most were empty, but dark stains on the floors suggested they hadn't always been. Hand-painted signs above each chamber bore alphanumeric codes, Echo 01 through Echo 09. The last chamber was different. The viewport was completely shattered, glass scattered across the floor in a pattern that suggested violent impact from inside. Deep scratches scored the reinforced walls around the opening, gouges too precise to be accidental damage. They looked deliberate, intelligent. Ethan photographed everything with his phone, the camera flash revealing details his flashlight had missed. The scratches weren't random. They formed patterns, almost like symbols or primitive writing. And they continued down the corridor beyond the laboratory, as if whatever had made them was trying to communicate or trying to mark its territory. At the end of the corridor, he found a cryogenics bay. Most of the units were dark, their power long since cut. But one unit in the corner still showed active status lights. Coolant lines ran to it from a dedicated power supply, and the temperature display showed a steady 40 degrees Celsius. A maintenance log hung from a clip beside the unit. Harold's careful handwriting, documenting weekly checks dating back 5 years. The last entry was circled in red, thermal variance detected, manual bypass required. God help us all. Ethan approached the cryo unit slowly. A small observation window allowed a view inside, but the glass was frosted with condensation. He wiped it clear with his sleeve and peered into the chamber. It was empty. Restraints hung loose from the chamber walls, but whatever they had been designed to hold was gone. A motion sensor beeped somewhere behind him. Ethan killed his flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, listening. Soft footsteps echoed from the main corridor, too light to be security boots. Someone else was in the facility, someone who moved like they knew exactly where they were going. Ethan crouched in the shadow of an equipment alcove, his heart hammering against his ribs as the footsteps approached. The sound was deliberate but cautious, someone who belonged here but didn't want to be caught. A thin red light swept across the laboratory walls, the kind of LED scanner used to read barcodes or serial numbers. The figure moved with practiced efficiency, checking labels on empty sample racks and photographing serial numbers with a modified phone. When the light finally illuminated a woman's face, Ethan saw intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore civilian clothes, but her movements had the careful precision of someone with scientific training. She paused at the shattered containment chamber, running her fingers along the claw marks with an expression of grim familiarity. That's when Ethan made his choice. Dr. Vance, I presume. She spun toward his voice, the scanner light freezing on his face. Her hand moved toward something in her jacket, then stopped as recognition dawned. "You're not supposed to be here," she said quietly. "Neither of us is. Found your name in my uncle's files. Harold Cole." Ethan stepped out of the shadows, hands visible. "He left me a trail of breadcrumbs that led here." Her posture relaxed slightly. "Harold." I wondered who he'd chosen to carry the torch. She studied his face in the red LED glow. "You're the nephew, the aircraft technician. I remember reading about the incident in '97, the test flight that went wrong. The words hit like a physical blow. Even here, even now, his failure followed him. That was a long time ago. Not long enough, apparently, or you wouldn't be standing in this tomb trying to resurrect the dead." She pocketed the scanner. "I'm Dr. Lila Vance, former contractor, current fugitive from justice, according to some very angry people in Washington." Former contractor doing what? Biological integration studies, DNA sequencing, hybridization protocols. Her voice carried the weight of old guilt. "We told ourselves we were advancing human medicine. Turns out we were creating weapons." She gestured toward the empty containment chambers. "Project Echo, the government's attempt to weaponize alien adaptability by splicing recovered genetic material with human subjects. Volunteers at first, then prisoners, then anyone they could acquire quietly. The lucky ones died in the first week. Ethan felt the temperature drop in the corridor, though the climate control had been dead for decades. And the unlucky ones? Adapted, changed, became something that frightened even the people who created them. Vance pulled out a tablet, its screen showing file directories filled with classified documents. "I've been documenting evidence for 5 years. Video files, test results, incident reports. Enough to bring down everyone involved. Why haven't you released it?" "Because I thought Echo was dead. Destroyed in 1987 when they officially terminated the program." She looked toward the empty cryo chamber. "But Harold kept sending me power consumption reports. The numbers didn't make sense unless something was still being kept alive down here." Ethan showed her the maintenance log he'd found. "Last entry says thermal variance detected. Manual bypass required." Vance went pale. Manual bypass means someone opened the chamber recently. She accessed a file on her tablet showing thermal imaging data from the facility. "Look at this. Harold's been tracking heat signatures for months. There's been movement in the abandoned sections. Something large, something that generates its own body heat. You're saying it escaped. I'm saying someone let it out. The question is who and why." She pulled up another file, this one showing personnel records. A familiar face stared back from the screen. A military officer with cold eyes and a rigid bearing. Major Conrad Harlow. He was a lieutenant when the program started. Now he's running cleanup operations for anything related to Area 51. His signature is on every termination order, every cover-up directive. You think he's behind this? I think Harlow's been playing a long game. Keep Echo contained but alive. Use it as leverage against anyone who might talk. The ultimate insurance policy. Vance's hands shook as she closed the files. But if it's loose now, that means the policy just expired. A distant radio crackled somewhere in the facility. Male voices, too far away to make out words, but close enough to matter. "We need to get out of here," Vance whispered. "Not without proof." Ethan pointed to the cryo chamber. "You said manual bypass. There should be logs, video records. The security system was hardened against data recovery. They weren't taking any chances. Harold was a custodian. He knew every back door, every workaround." Ethan moved to a service panel near the chamber. Custodial staff always had separate access for maintenance records. The panel yielded to his multi-tool, revealing a secondary control system with its own storage drive. The interface was ancient but functional. As the system booted up, files began populating the screen. Maintenance logs, yes, but also security camera feeds, archived automatically by the building's environmental systems. "Jesus," Vance breathed, watching the screen. The video showed the cryo chamber 3 days ago. A figure in civilian clothes approached the unit. Harold, moving with the careful determination of a man who'd made a final decision. He entered a bypass code and stepped back as the chamber began its warming cycle. But Harold wasn't alone. Another figure stood in the shadows, partially visible but clearly armed. As the chamber hissed open, Harold turned toward his companion and spoke words the audio couldn't capture. The armed figure raised a weapon. "Harold Cole died trying to free whatever was in that chamber. Your uncle was murdered," Vance said quietly. The radio chatter grew closer. Multiple voices now, coordinating a search pattern. "We need to go," Ethan said, downloading the files to a flash drive. "But first, what exactly are we dealing with? What was Echo?" Vance grabbed his arm as footsteps echoed from the main corridor. "Not what, who? Echo was a person once. A volunteer who believed we were trying to cure genetic diseases." Her voice cracked. "Her name was Sarah Chen. She was 23 years old, and she trusted us to help her." The footsteps were getting closer. "And now? Now she's something that can tear through reinforced steel and has been learning to survive on her own for 40 years. Vance pulled him toward an emergency exit. "And if Harlow's people are here, it means they've lost track of her too." The emergency exit led to a maintenance tunnel that connected to the facility's old ventilation system. As they crawled through dusty ductwork, the sound of tactical radios echoed through the complex above them. Multiple teams, coordinated sweeps, the kind of operation that suggested serious resources and official backing. Control, this is Alpha Team. A voice crackled through the metal. Sector 7 clear, moving to cryogenics. Copy Alpha. Bravo Team, status on the perimeter breach. Vehicle located approximately quarter-mile east of the fence. Civilian plates registered to an Ethan Cole. Vance grabbed Ethan's arm as they heard his name. They were in the system now, officially persons of interest. There would be no walking away from this quietly. The tunnel ended at a ventilation grate that looked out over the logistics yard where Ethan had entered. Spotlights swept the area in coordinated patterns, and armed figures moved between the concrete foundations with military precision. But these weren't standard Air Force security. The uniforms were black, no insignia, the kind of unit that didn't officially exist. Private contractors, Vance whispered. Harlow's personal cleanup crew. A command vehicle sat near the fence line, bristling with communications equipment. Through its open door, they could see a figure hunched over a bank of monitors. Tall, rigid bearing, the face from Vance's personnel files. Major Conrad Harlow looked older than his official photos, but his voice carried the same cold authority Ethan remembered from his Air Force days. "Sir, we've got traces of unauthorized access in the cryogenics bay," a technician reported. "Someone bypassed the security locks and accessed the archive system." "Dr. Vance?" Harlow said without looking up from the screens. "Always so thorough. Agent Keene, what's your status on the secondary sweep?" Another voice answered from the radio, younger but equally professional. "Sir, Containment Chamber 7 shows signs of recent activation. The subject's restraints have been manually released. Time frame? Approximately 72 hours, sir. Matches the timeline for Cole's termination. So Harold's death had been planned, timed to coincide with Echo's release. But why? What was Harlow's endgame? "Sir," the technician continued, "there's something else. The archive surveillance shows Cole wasn't alone when he accessed the chamber. Someone was with him, staying in the shadows. Show me." The screens flickered as video files loaded. Ethan and Vance watched as their own break-in was displayed in real time, their movements tracked by security cameras they hadn't even noticed. But more disturbing was the footage from 3 days earlier, Harold's final visit to the cryo chamber. The shadowy figure who'd watched Harold die was clearer in the enhanced security footage. Agent Darius Keene, according to the name tape on his tactical vest. Young, competent, following orders. But something in his expression suggested doubt, a flicker of conscience that hadn't quite been extinguished by training and discipline. "Agent Keene," Harlow's voice cut through the radio chatter. "Bring me those drives, all of them. And locate our missing scientist. Dr. Vance has been collecting evidence far too long." "Sir," Keene's voice carried a note of uncertainty. "The civilian Cole, he's just a technician. Former Air Force, no security clearance, no access to classified information. He's a loose end, Agent Keene. And we both know what happens to loose ends in this business." A pause. "Yes, sir," but Ethan caught the hesitation in the younger man's voice. Whatever doubts Agent Keene harbored, they were growing stronger. The radio traffic intensified as teams reported in from different sections of the facility. The search was systematic, professional, but with an undercurrent of nervousness that suggested they weren't just looking for intruders. They were hunting something that had them spooked. "Control, this is Charlie Team," came a tense voice. "We've got signs of movement in the lower levels. Something large, sir. The motion sensors are going crazy down here. Define large, Charlie. Human-sized, maybe bigger. Moving through areas that should be sealed. So the blast doors on level 3 are standing open. They require manual override to operate. Fall back to the upper levels," Harlow ordered. "Maintain perimeter, but do not engage. Repeat, do not engage unless directly threatened." Vance grabbed Ethan's shoulder. "They're afraid of her," she whispered. "After all these years, they're still afraid of what they created. Why? What can she do? Adapt, learn, survive in environments that would kill a normal human. The alien DNA didn't just change her physically, it enhanced her intelligence, her problem-solving abilities. She's been learning for 40 years, Ethan, learning about us, about our weaknesses." A new voice crackled through the radio, this one tight with fear. "Control, this is Delta Team. We've got a problem down here. The power conduits to the main facility have been deliberately severed. Someone knew exactly which lines to cut. Elaborate. Sir, this wasn't random damage. The cuts are precise, surgical. Whoever did this understands our electrical systems better than we do. Harlow's voice lost its professional calm for the first time. All teams converge on the command vehicle. We're moving to Protocol 7. Ethan had never heard of Protocol 7, but Vance went white. We need to get out of here, now! What's Protocol 7? Sterilization. They're going to purge the entire facility with thermite charges. Destroy all evidence, including any inconvenient witnesses. The spotlights were converging on their position as teams moved toward the command vehicle. In minutes, they'd be trapped between Harlow's forces and whatever Echo had become. The tunnel system extends beyond the facility, Vance said. If we can reach the old water treatment plant, there's a service road that connects to the town. They began moving through the ductwork. But behind them, new sounds echoed through the facility. Not the measured footsteps of tactical teams, but something else. Something that moved with fluid grace through spaces human beings shouldn't be able to navigate. Echo was hunting too. Dawn broke gray and dirty over the Nevada desert as Ethan and Vance emerged from a culvert 2 miles outside the town limits. The service road Vance had promised was little more than a dirt track, but it led to civilization and, hopefully, safety. The town of Rachel, Nevada, existed primarily to serve the needs of Area 51 personnel and the occasional UFO tourist. At 6 in the morning, most of its residents were either heading to work at the base or trying to sleep off the previous night's drinking. The diner on Main Street was one of the few businesses already open, its neon sign flickering weakly in the pale light. They entered separately, Vance first, Ethan 5 minutes later. The interior was classic Americana, cracked vinyl booths, a counter with stools that had seen better decades, and a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the Eisenhower administration. But the reaction to Ethan's appearance was immediate and unsettling. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A man in coveralls reading a newspaper looked up, saw Ethan's Air Force surplus jacket, and quickly looked away. A woman feeding her toddler suddenly found reasons to pay her check and leave. Sheriff Ray Delgado walked in as Ethan was ordering coffee, tall-weathered, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much and forgotten too little. He surveyed the diner's nervous atmosphere and focused on the stranger in the military jacket. "You're not from around here," Delgado said. "It wasn't a question. Passing through," Ethan replied. "Funny thing about people passing through Rachel. They usually don't stop, especially people with base connections." Delgado's hand rested casually near his service weapon. "Mind if we have a conversation outside?" The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and something else, smoke, distant but acrid. Delgado followed Ethan's gaze toward the horizon, where a thin plume rose from the direction of the old facility. "That fire started about an hour ago," the sheriff said. "Right around the time, my dispatcher picked up radio chatter about a security incident at a decommissioned site." "Care to explain the coincidence?" Before Ethan could answer, Vance appeared from the diner's side exit. "Sheriff Delgado, we need to talk." Recognition flickered in the lawman's eyes. "Dr. Lila Vance, haven't seen you since you testified before the State Environmental Commission 5 years ago. Something about groundwater contamination near the base. The contamination was just the tip of the iceberg, Ray." Vance pulled out her tablet, showing him selected files from the archive. "What I'm about to show you explains a lot of things. The livestock deaths, the cancer clusters, the people who disappeared over the years and were never officially reported missing." Delgado studied the screen, his expression growing darker with each document. Medical records, test results, incident reports, a pattern of systematic experimentation and cover-up stretching back decades. "This is what they were doing out there?" he asked quietly. "Part of it. Project Echo was just one program among many, but it's the one that's still active." Ethan's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed his sister's number, but when he answered, Marjorie's voice was tight with fear. "Ethan, where the hell are you?" Some men came by the shop this morning. Government types, asking questions about you. They had a warrant to copy all my computer files. Are you safe? For now. But they weren't just copying files, Ethan. They were asking about Uncle Harold, about any packages or storage units he might have mentioned. They know about whatever you found. Ethan looked at Delgado and Vance. My sister. She's been dragged into this. Where is she? Vance asked. Vegas. She runs an auto parts shop there. Delgado was already reaching for his radio. This is Sheriff Delgado to all units. I need a welfare check on a business in Las Vegas. Priority 1. Before he could complete the transmission, his radio crackled with an emergency broadcast. All units, be advised. We have reports of a power substation failure approximately 10 miles northeast of Rachel. Transformers are down, lines are severed. Power company is requesting law enforcement escort for repair crews. That's the Yucca Mountain substation, Delgado said. Serves the entire Northern Valley. Vance grabbed his arm. That's not equipment failure. Echo needs power sources to survive. She's feeding. The sheriff stared at her. She, Sarah Chen. Age 23 when the program began, age unknown now. 40 years of genetic modification and adaptive evolution. She escaped containment 3 days ago. A battered pickup truck roared into the diner parking lot, its driver stumbling out with the unsteady gait of someone in shock. The man wore a utility company uniform, his hard hat cracked, his face streaked with something that looked like burns. Sheriff, the man called out. You need to get people away from the substation. There's something wrong out there. Something that ain't natural. Delgado approached the lineman carefully. What did you see, Pete? It looked like a person at first, standing near the main transformer. But when it moved, Pete shuddered. It moved wrong. Too fluid, like it didn't have bones. And when it touched the lines, the electricity didn't hurt it. It was drawing power from the grid, sucking it right out of the cables. Did it see you? Yeah, it turned and looked right at me. And I swear, Sheriff, it understood what I was. It could have killed me easy, but it just studied me, like it was trying to figure out if I was a threat. Vance exchanged glances with Ethan. She's learning, adapting to freedom. But she's not mindlessly aggressive. She's making choices. The radio crackled again. Sheriff Delgado, this is Nevada State Police. We've got reports of a federal operation approximately 15 miles east of your position. Military vehicles, aircraft, the works. They're requesting local law enforcement stay clear of the area. Federal operation, my ass, Delgado muttered. They're hunting whatever escaped from that facility. A new voice cut through the radio chatter, younger but carrying official authority. Sheriff, this is Agent Darius Keene, Department of Energy. I need to speak with you immediately regarding the individuals you're currently harboring. Delgado keyed his radio. Agent Keene, this is an open channel. If you want to talk, come to my office like a civilized person, sir. The subjects with you are persons of interest in a national security matter. For their own safety and yours, they need to be taken into federal custody immediately. The subjects have names, Agent Keene, and they're under my protection until I understand what's really happening here. Ethan felt something shift in the dynamic. Whatever doubts Agent Keene had been harboring, they were coming to a head. The question was whether conscience would override duty when the choice finally came. In the distance, helicopters appeared on the horizon, black shapes against the morning sky, moving with the purposeful coordination of a military operation. But they weren't heading toward the substation where Echo had been spotted. They were heading toward the town. The damaged substation sat like a broken monument in the desert, its twisted metal framework reaching toward a sky that promised another scorching day. Heat shimmered off the concrete. Pad where massive transformers lay cracked open, their oil pooling in dark stains that reflected the afternoon sun. Ethan crouched behind a boulder, 50 yards from the installation, adjusting the thermal scope Sheriff Delgado had provided. Beside him, Vance monitored radio frequencies on a scanner, while Delgado coordinated with his deputies through encrypted channels. Marjorie had driven up from Vegas against everyone's advice, bringing her own rifle and a determination that brooked no argument. Anything on thermal? Vance asked quietly. Negative. But the ambient temperature from all that spilled transformer oil is masking heat signatures. Ethan adjusted the scope's sensitivity. Wait! Movement, 2 o'clock. A shadow detached itself from the wreckage of the main transformer, human-shaped but wrong, in ways that made the eyes struggle to process what it was seeing. The figure moved with fluid grace through spaces too small for a normal person, sometimes seeming to flow rather than walk. Jesus, Marjorie breathed. What happened to her? Echo paused at the edge of the installation, her head tilting in a motion that was disturbingly bird-like. Her skin had a translucent quality that shifted color subtly to match her surroundings. Not perfect camouflage, but enough to make tracking difficult. When she knelt beside a severed power line, her fingers extended into something resembling tendrils, making contact with the exposed copper. She's not just touching it, Vance observed. She's interfacing with it, drawing power directly into her system. As they watched, Echo began tracing patterns in the sandy ground with her finger. The movements were deliberate, geometric, the same symbols they'd found scratched into the containment chamber walls. It's a communication attempt, Ethan realized. She's trying to signal someone, or something, Delgado muttered, but his hand had moved away from his weapon. Look at the pattern. It's not random. The symbols formed a sequence, a spiral followed by intersecting lines, then what appeared to be a representation of the facility's layout. Echo completed the pattern and sat back on her heels, waiting. She knows we're here, Vance said. As if responding to her words, Echo's head turned directly toward their hiding place. Her eyes, still recognizably human despite everything else that had changed, met Ethan's through the scope. She raised one hand in what might have been a greeting or a warning. The radio scanner crackled with military traffic. Containment teams maintain perimeter. Subject is stationary at grid reference 77 Alpha. Do not approach without authorization. That's Harlow's frequency, Vance said. He's got teams positioned around us. A new voice cut through the chatter. Agent Keene, speaking on a different channel. Sheriff Delgado, if you can hear this, I'm approximately half a mile south of your position. I need to speak with you, alone. Delgado keyed his radio. Agent Keene, this is an open channel. Say what you need to say. Sir, Major Harlow has authorization to initiate Protocol 7 at 1800 hours. That's 40 minutes from now. Anyone within the blast radius will be considered acceptable losses. Marjorie grabbed her brother's arm. What's Protocol 7? Thermite charges, Vance said grimly. They're going to sterilize the entire area. Buildings, evidence, witnesses, everything, including the town, Delgado added, his face pale. My people, my jurisdiction. Through the scope, Ethan watched Echo complete another symbol sequence. This time the pattern was different, more urgent, almost frantic. She was running out of time and knew it. A figure appeared at the edge of the thermal scope's range, moving carefully through the desert scrub. Agent Keene, hands visible and empty, he approached their position with the cautious movements of someone trying not to get shot by either side. He's alone, Ethan reported. Or he wants us to think he is, Delgado replied. But he stood up, his weapon lowered. Agent Keene, advance and be recognized. The federal agent was younger than Ethan had expected, maybe 30, with the kind of competent bearing that suggested military training. But his eyes held doubt, and his movements lacked the mechanical certainty of someone following orders without question. Sheriff Dr. Vance, Mr. Cole. Keene nodded to each of them. I'm sorry about your uncle, Mr. Cole. Harold was a good man who was trying to do the right thing. Were you there when he died? Ethan asked. Keene's jaw tightened. I was following orders. Major Harlow said Harold had become a security risk, that he was planning to release classified information to foreign agents. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. Made the job easier. Keene pulled out a tablet showing them tactical displays. But I've been monitoring the situation for 3 days now. Echo hasn't attacked anyone. She's avoided human contact except when absolutely necessary. The utility worker at the substation, she could have killed him, but she let him go. So why the hunt? Delgado asked. Because she's proof. Living evidence of everything the government has been denying for 40 years. Human experimentation, illegal detention, genetic manipulation. She's a walking war crimes tribunal. Vance studied the tactical displays. How many teams does Harlow have positioned? 12 operatives, plus a drone squadron and an artillery observer for the thermite strike. But half my team is having second thoughts about following orders that involve killing American civilians. What are you proposing? Ethan asked. A compromise. We secure Echo, ensure she's taken into protective custody rather than terminated. The evidence gets released through proper channels. Congressional oversight, Inspector General's office. People go to jail, but nobody else dies. And if Echo doesn't want to be secured? Marjorie asked. Before Keen could answer, the thermal scope beeped with proximity alerts. Multiple heat signatures were approaching from different directions. Harlow's containment teams moving into final positions. Echo must have sensed the closing net. She stood abruptly, her form shimmering as her skin adapted to match the desert landscape. But instead of fleeing, she began walking directly toward their position. She's coming this way, Ethan reported. All teams, subject is mobile. Harlow's voice crackled over the radio. Converge on grid 77 Alpha. Use non-lethal containment only. Repeat, non-lethal containment. He wants her alive, Vance observed. The question is why? Echo stopped 20 yards from their position. Up close, her transformation was even more dramatic. Her height had increased by several inches, her limbs elongated for greater reach. Her face retained human features, but with an otherworldly quality that suggested enhanced senses and intelligence. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that made the words resonate strangely. Harold Cole was kind to me, she said. The words carefully pronounced, as if language was something she had to consciously construct. He brought me books, stories of the outside world. I learned much from him, Sarah, Vance said gently. Your name was Sarah Chen. Echo tilted her head, considering. Sarah was the name of the person I was before. I am something different now. But I remember her dreams, her hopes for helping others. Her gaze shifted to Ethan. Harold spoke of you. The nephew who carried guilt like a stone. The words hit harder than Ethan expected. He shouldn't have. Guilt can destroy or it can motivate. Harold chose motivation. He freed me not because he thought I was innocent, but because he believed I deserved the chance to choose my own path. Tactical teams were closing in from 3 directions. Through his scope, Ethan could see muzzle flashes as tranquilizer weapons were readied. They're coming, he warned. Echo nodded. I know, I can hear their heartbeats, smell their fear. They do not understand that I am not the monster they created me to be. Then prove it, Keen said, stepping forward. Come with us voluntarily. Let us protect you while the evidence is released. Protection. Echo's laugh was a sound like wind through broken glass. I have been protected for 40 years, Agent Keen. Locked in cages, studied like a laboratory animal, treated as a thing rather than a person. Your protection and their imprisonment look very similar from my perspective. The first tranquilizer dart struck the boulder beside her, its electronic tracker blinking. Echo moved faster than human reflexes should allow, flowing between cover points as more darts followed her path. All teams, target is evading containment. Harlow's voice carried increasing frustration. Switch to capture nets. Bring her down. A weighted net deployed from a launcher, but Echo seemed to anticipate its trajectory. She twisted in midair, avoiding the mesh, and landed in a crouch that brought her face to face with Ethan. The symbols I drew in the sand, did you understand their meaning? Some kind of map? A warning. The facility where you found my cell was not the only site. There are others hidden across the desert. Other survivors like me still imprisoned. If Major Harlow succeeds in covering up Project Echo, they will remain buried forever. A second net launcher deployed, this one finding its target. Echo made no effort to avoid it, allowing the weighted mesh to pin her to the ground. But as the containment team rushed forward, she spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. I choose to surrender, but not to them. To you, Agent Keen, to Sheriff Delgado. To people who might still remember that I was human once. The old flood control canal stretched like a concrete scar across the desert landscape, its walls scarred by decades of flash floods and abandonment. 20 feet deep and 40 feet wide, it would funnel anything caught in its path toward the distant mountains, or provide cover for something that didn't want to be seen from above. Echo moved through the canal with fluid grace, her modified physiology allowing her to traverse the steep walls as easily as level ground. Behind her, at carefully measured intervals, followed the unlikely alliance that had formed around her capture: Ethan, Vance, Delgado, Marjorie, and Agent Keene. The plan was desperate, but simple. Draw Harlow's forces into the canal system, away from the town and any innocent bystanders. Use Echo as bait to lure the containment teams into terrain where their technological advantages would be reduced. Then broadcast everything, the evidence, Echo's testimony, Harlow's illegal operations, to every news outlet and oversight body they could reach. Thunderheads gathered on the horizon, towering cumulus clouds that promised the kind of violent desert storm that could turn the dry canal into a raging torrent within minutes. "Weather's not looking good," Delgado observed, checking his radio. "Flash flood warnings for the entire valley." "That might work in our favor," Keene said, monitoring his tactical display. "Harlow's teams are equipped for desert operations, not water rescue." Echo had stopped at a bend in the canal, her skin shifting to match the weathered concrete. When she spoke, her voice carried perfectly despite the distance. "They are coming. 8 teams moving in a pincer formation. Major Harlow believes he has us trapped." "How can you possibly know that?" Marjorie asked. "I hear their radio transmissions." "The alien genetics enhanced more than just my physical capabilities. I can detect electromagnetic emissions across a much broader spectrum than normal humans." Through his binoculars, Ethan could see the first containment team approaching the canal's edge. They moved with military precision, but something in their body language suggested uncertainty. These were soldiers following orders they didn't fully understand against an enemy that defied their training. "Team Alpha in position," a voice crackled from Keene's radio. "Target is stationary at grid reference 9-2 Bravo. Copy Alpha, Team Bravo, close from the north." Echo has nowhere to run now, but Echo wasn't running. She was drawing patterns in the concrete dust again, the same geometric symbols, but larger and more elaborate. As the containment teams descended into the canal, she completed the pattern and stepped back. "What is she doing?" Vance asked. "Communicating," Echo replied, though she was still 20 yards away. Her enhanced hearing made normal conversation possible across impossible distances. "With the others." "Others?" "The survivors at the other facilities. We have learned to create a network, electromagnetic pulses that mimic neural activity, a primitive form of telepathy using the modifications they made to our brains." The first team reached the canal floor, their weapons trained on Echo's position. She made no aggressive moves, but the soldiers' nervousness was palpable. They had expected a monster, not something that looked almost human and spoke with quiet intelligence. "Target acquired," the team leader reported. "Subject appears docile. Beginning approach for containment." That's when everything went wrong. A drone appeared overhead, not one of Harlow's surveillance units, but a media helicopter with a camera mount. Someone had tipped off the press and the entire operation was being broadcast live. "All teams, we have media presence." Harlow's voice carried undisguised fury. "Initiate communications blackout. No unauthorized transmissions," but Agent Keene was already broadcasting on emergency frequencies, his voice carrying to every law enforcement agency in the state. "This is Agent Darius Keene, Department of Energy. I'm witnessing the attempted illegal detention of a United States citizen without due process. Federal forces are operating on Nevada soil without proper authorization or coordination with local law enforcement." The containment team hesitated, caught between conflicting orders and the knowledge that their actions were being recorded. In that moment of uncertainty, Echo made her choice. She walked directly toward the nearest soldier, her hands visible and empty. When she stopped 5 feet away, she knelt and placed her palms flat on the concrete, a gesture of submission that was unmistakably human. "My name is Sarah Chen," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the desert air. 40 years ago, I volunteered for a medical experiment that I was told would help cure genetic diseases. Instead, I was transformed into something the government considers a weapon. I've been imprisoned, studied, and tortured for 4 decades. I surrender myself now to the press, to the people, and to whatever justice system still exists in this country. The soldier stared at her, his weapon wavering. "Ma'am, We have orders to bring you in. I understand. But I ask that you remember I am not a thing to be captured. I'm a person who has been denied basic human rights for most of my life." The media helicopter circled lower, its cameras capturing every word. Other aircraft appeared on the horizon, more news crews, drawn by the live broadcasts that were already going viral on social media. "Team Alpha, report status," Harlow demanded. The team leader looked up at the circling helicopters, then back at Echo, kneeling peacefully on the concrete. "Sir, subject has surrendered voluntarily. She's asking to speak to the media. Negative. Proceed with containment immediately. Sir, with respect, we have multiple media outlets recording our every move. If we use force on a surrendering subject, you have your orders, Sergeant." But the sergeant was looking at his squad, seeing the same doubt in their faces that was reflected in his own. These were soldiers, not executioners. They had signed up to defend their country, not to cover up war crimes. Thunder rumbled overhead as the storm moved closer. The first fat raindrops struck the concrete, and Echo tilted her face upward, as if she had never felt rain before. "I had forgotten what storms smelled like," she said softly. "In my cell, I could only smell recycled air and disinfectant. But out here, I can smell the desert flowers blooming, the moisture in the air, the fierce sweat of frightened men." Agent Keene stepped forward, his weapon holstered. "Sarah Chen, as a federal agent, I'm placing you in protective custody, pending a full investigation of the circumstances of your detention. You have the right to remain silent, but you also have the right to speak. You have the right to legal representation, medical care, and basic human dignity." "Keene," Harlow's voice crackled with rage. "Stand down immediately or face court-martial." "Sir, I am following my oath to protect American citizens and uphold the Constitution. That supersedes any operational orders." The rain was falling harder now, turning the dust to mud and making the concrete slick. But Echo seemed unaffected by the weather. If anything, she looked more alive than she had since emerging from the facility. "Agent Keene," she said, "I appreciate your offer of protection, but I decline. I've been protected by the government for 40 years. What I want now is something much more radical." "What's that?" Echo stood, water streaming down her transformed features. "I want to be free, truly free, for the first time since I was 23 years old. And I want the others like me to have that same choice." She looked directly into the camera of the circling helicopter. "My name is Sarah Chen. I'm not a monster, though monsters made me what I am. There are others like me, hidden in facilities across this country. We are not weapons. We are not subjects for experimentation. We are people, and we deserve to be heard." The storm broke fully now, turning the canal into a rushing torrent. But Echo stood firm against the current, her modified physiology allowing her to maintain footing where others would be swept away. As water swirled around their ankles, the containment teams began to withdraw to higher ground. But Echo remained, speaking to the cameras, telling her story to a world that had never known she existed. The courthouse in Rachel, Nevada, had been built during the town's brief mining boom in the 1920s, a solid stone structure designed to last through whatever the desert could throw at it. Most of its official functions had been transferred to the county seat decades ago, leaving behind empty courtrooms and a basement that few people knew existed. Sheriff Delgado led the group through a service entrance as rain continued to lash the building's windows. The media circus had followed them from the canal, but the courthouse's thick walls provided temporary sanctuary from cameras and questions. Built this place to withstand anything, Delgado explained as they descended concrete steps into the basement, including government overreach. The hidden vault had been constructed by Judge Samuel Morrison in 1951, a cautious man who had watched the federal government establish secret installations in his jurisdiction without any oversight or transparency. Over the decades, Morrison and his successors had quietly documented everything they could: incident reports, medical records, property seizures, and death certificates that didn't match official explanations. Jesus, Vance breathed as she surveyed the filing cabinets that lined the walls. This is 40 years of evidence. Echo stood in the center of the room, her head tilted as if listening to sounds others couldn't hear. Water still dripped from her hair, but her skin had adapted to the cooler temperature, taking on a faint luminescence that provided additional light. "They know we're here," she said quietly. "Major Harlow has positioned teams around the building, but he's hesitating. Too many witnesses, too many cameras." Ethan was helping Vance set up her laptop, preparing to upload the facility's archived files to a secure server. "How long do we have?" "Not long. Harlow is requesting authorization for a direct assault. He's telling his superiors that national security requires immediate action." Delgado activated his radio, broadcasting on the emergency frequency used by law enforcement across the state. "This is Sheriff Ray Delgado of Lincoln County, Nevada. I'm requesting immediate assistance from all available units. Federal agents are preparing to assault a civilian building in my jurisdiction without proper warrants or authorization." The response was immediate. Police departments across Nevada began dispatching units toward Rachel, along with state troopers and federal marshals who weren't under Harlow's command. "Whatever was happening would have plenty of official witnesses. Upload is at 60%, Vance reported. "Medical files, test results, budget documents, everything Harold collected over the years." Echo approached one of the filing cabinets, her enhanced senses allowing her to detect specific scents among the thousands of documents. She pulled out a manila folder labeled Genetic Integration Studies Subject Profiles. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Men, women, children, all volunteers, according to the attached forms. All dead, according to the subsequent incident reports. "These were the early subjects," Echo said, her voice carrying grief that seemed to span decades. "Before they learned how to make the modifications stable, most died within days." She stopped at one photograph, a young Asian woman with kind eyes and a hopeful smile. The name beneath read, "Sarah Chen, subject ER7. "I remember having this picture taken," she said softly. "I was so excited to be part of something that might help people. I thought I was going to help cure cancer." Marjorie moved to stand beside Echo, studying the photograph. "You were beautiful. I was human. There is beauty in that, even if the form changes." Echo closed the folder carefully. "But I am not the same person as the woman in this photograph. 40 years of modification, isolation, and survival have made me something new, something better." Ethan asked. Echo considered the question. "Different. Not better or worse. Simply adapted to circumstances that no human should have to endure." The laptop chimed as the upload completed. Vance immediately began syncing additional files from her portable drive, creating redundant copies across multiple servers. "That's everything," she announced. "Medical records, financial documents, personnel files, video evidence. The entire Project Echo archive is now in the public domain." "Upload is at 90%, Vance reported from her laptop. "Once this hits the servers, there's no putting it back in the box." Echo had moved to study an old aerial photograph of the facility, her finger tracing the underground sections that weren't visible from the surface. "There," she said, pointing to a section marked with red ink. "Facility 7 and here Facility 12. Both still active, both holding survivors like me." Delgado leaned over the photograph.
How many others are there?
I'm not certain. Our communication network is limited by distance and interference. But I have sensed at least 8 others across 3 facilities. 8 people who've been prisoners for decades, Vance said grimly. People who volunteered for medical experiments and ended up as government property. The radio crackled with new voices, state police units reporting their positions as they converged on Rachel. But Harlow's forces were also moving. Through the basement's small windows, they could see tactical lights beginning to surround the building. "Sheriff Delgado," Harlow's voice came through on the emergency frequency. "You are harboring a dangerous entity and individuals in possession of classified materials. Surrender them immediately or face federal charges." Delgado keyed his radio. "Major Harlow, you are operating in my jurisdiction without proper authority. Stand down your forces and present proper warrants through appropriate channels. This is a matter of national security. This is a matter of basic human rights. And it's being broadcast live to the entire world." Through the windows, they could see news helicopters circling overhead, their spotlights illuminating the tactical teams. Social media was exploding with live streams and commentary. Whatever happened next would be witnessed by millions. Echo approached the basement's small window, peering up at the aircraft. "Agent Keene is trying to contact his superiors in Washington. He's requesting orders that don't involve harming civilians." "How can you possibly know that?" Marjorie asked. "I can hear radio transmissions across multiple frequencies simultaneously. His commanding officer is telling him to follow Harlow's lead, but Keene is refusing." A new voice cut through the radio chatter, older, carrying the authority of high rank. "All federal units, this is General Patricia Morrison, Joint Chiefs of Staff. I'm ordering an immediate stand-down of all operations in Lincoln County, Nevada. No further action will be taken without direct authorization from the Secretary of Defense." The tactical lights outside began to withdraw, but slowly, reluctantly. "General Morrison," Harlow responded. "We have the situation contained. The entity and the classified materials can be secured within the hour. Major Harlow, you have exceeded your authority and operated outside established protocols. Return to base immediately for debriefing." But Harlow wasn't finished. Through the window, they could see him speaking intensely into his radio, his body language suggesting desperation rather than compliance. Echo suddenly stiffened, her enhanced hearing detecting something the others missed. "He's not standing down. He's ordering a final assault. He believes this is his last chance to contain the situation. All units, prepare for breach." Harlow's voice came through clearly now, no longer caring about proper channels. "National security requires immediate action." That's when Agent Keene made his choice. His voice cut through the tactical frequency with crystal clarity. "All federal agents. This is Agent Darius. Keene, Major Conrad Harlow is operating without authorization and in violation of direct orders from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. I am placing him under arrest for insubordination and violation of civil rights." The sound of the confrontation carried clearly. Through the desert air, raised voices, the click of weapons being readied. The tense standoff between competing loyalties and conflicting orders. Echo moved away from the window. "It's time for me to choose," she said quietly. "Choose what?" Ethan asked. "Whether to remain hidden while others fight for my freedom, or to stand up and speak for myself." She walked to the basement stairs, her transformed features resolute. "I have been silent for 40 years. I will not be silent any longer." As she climbed toward the courthouse's main floor, toward the cameras and questions and uncertain future that waited above, the others followed. Whatever happened next, Sarah Chen, Echo, would face it as a free person. Speaking with her own voice for the first time in 4 decades, the storm had transformed the courthouse plaza into a stage lit by lightning and spotlights. Sarah Chen, Echo, stood before the cameras, rain streaming down her transformed features as the world watched. Behind the news crews, federal agents maintained an uneasy perimeter, while Agent Keene held Major Harlow at gunpoint. "My name is Sarah Chen," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the storm. 40 years ago, I volunteered for medical research. Instead, I became Project Echo, the government's attempt to create human alien weapons. She stepped forward, her movements fluid despite the chaos. For 4 decades, I've been imprisoned, experimented on, denied basic human rights. But I am not the monster they tried to create. I feel pain, hope, loneliness. I remember my dreams of helping people through science. Dr. Vance emerged from the courthouse with her laptop. The evidence we've uploaded tonight proves Project Echo wasn't isolated. 12 facilities, hundreds of volunteers. Most died. Those who survived were kept as government property. Major Harlow pushed past Keene, weapon drawn. You don't understand what you're unleashing. That thing could carry alien pathogens. Echo turned to face him. Is that how you justify 40 years of torture? That we're a threat to humanity? You are a threat. No, my existence threatens your ability to commit atrocities in secret. That's what you truly fear. She walked toward him, hands empty. What have you built, Major? Prisons disguised as laboratories. A system that turns humans into government property. I was protecting America. You were protecting yourself from accountability. Echo's voice carried profound sadness. I forgive you, Major Harlow. The words hit him like a blow. What? I forgive you? Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry your hatred. She stepped closer. You thought changing my body would change my soul. But the part that is Sarah Chen, that dreams and hopes, you could never touch. When Harlow raised his weapon, Ethan stepped between them. She's a person tortured by her own government for 40 years. Echo knelt in the rain, palms flat on the pavement. If killing me gives you peace, do it. But know that my death won't erase what you've done, or save the 8 others still imprisoned in facilities like mine. Harlow's weapon shook as he stared at the woman offering forgiveness to her tormentor. The gun clattered to the wet pavement. Echo rose and approached the microphones. Tonight I choose freedom. To the 8 survivors still in custody, help is coming. You will not be forgotten. She walked toward the desert's edge. I choose exile rather than custody, freedom rather than protection. But I'll be watching. Lightning flashed and Echo seemed to shimmer and fade into the landscape. When vision returned, she was gone, leaving only footprints and the memory of a woman who chose forgiveness over vengeance. Months later, congressional hearings freed the remaining survivors. Harlow was sentenced to life imprisonment. The others rebuilt their lives around the truth Echo had forced into the light. On desert ridges, Ethan sometimes found stone patterns spelling messages in Echo's symbolic language: distance, safety, watching, hope. Always 2 symbols side by side, Echo's mark for survivor next to a human handprint. Sarah Chen lived free in the vast desert, neither fully human nor entirely other, but something new that had chosen compassion over vengeance and become the government's greatest fear. A conscience that could no longer be silenced. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.